Well, the three of us are excited to talk to you today about the future of omnicommerce and shopper marketing. I think for starters, if you guys can both introduce yourselves, your role, your company, a little bit about each.
Sure. Josh Rosen. I work at Church & Dwight, which sounds like a law firm, but we are actually the manufacturers of Arm & Hammer, Vitafusion, Trojan, most recently acquired Hero, Mighty Patch, so a bunch of consumer packaged goods. I kind of oversee our e-commerce business, and I've been there for about 6 years.
My name is Nick James, and I work for Blue Buffalo, and I head up consumer experiences and digital products. And like I said, I've been there 2 years. It's been a pretty wild ride, so great.
And we just discovered over here, we didn't coordinate this on purpose, but we all wore blue in support of Blue Buffalo. Yeah, it just happened. Very good. So if you didn't know, this is Broadway week, and you can get buy one, get one half off, or is it buy one, get one free? Broadway tickets. And so I told Mike I'm happy to be here reprising my role of middle-aged woman in a suit coat asking insightful questions. So on the promise of being insightful, let's dive in. And so the name of our panel involves the word future, which I realized as I was reading through our questions. And we're starting off looking backwards a little bit. So just a little bit of reflection before we dive in. I just wanted to say, too, I was on the bus this morning talking to a woman from India, and she was asking me questions about the recession and the impact of inflation. We got really deep on the bus, the impact of inflation on grocery prices, and we had a really nice talk. So we're going to start off talking about the economy a little bit. So how are you addressing value with consumers in the current economic landscape?
I think Nick is going to have a much more deep answer than I am with sort of the pet relationship, but I think not to be too provocative here, but it depends on the brand in terms of how we address it. So really, value means different things to different consumers. I'll give you an example of sort of like our vitamin business. We make gummy vitamins. We're the largest manufacturer of gummy vitamins. Value could mean the number of gummies you get in for the price. It could mean the number of gummies per dose. Maybe some people want more gummies per dose. Maybe it could be based on calories per gummy. Or it could also be, compliance. The fact that I know I can buy these gummies and my whole family, if it's an immune-oriented product, is going to take that. So actually something we've been looking at in terms of value is really trying to understand from ratings and reviews what are sort of top drivers of kind of positive ratings and reviews, especially correlated with value. And what we find across, the different brands that we manage is it can be very different. I think everybody immediately goes to price value, or sometimes convenience, but you'll find that there are certain attributes, that people associate it with it. So you're able to sort of get towards that value without literally making it more of a price transactional piece.
That was a really good answer, though, because you added dimensions to it. Yeah, I love that. For us in the pet space, we talk about pets being like children, and so a lot of times you've kind of predetermined your decision making way up front before maybe you're ready to make that point of purchase. Obviously, things have changed as we've gone through the pandemic, and maybe service levels of items on shelves or on the digital shelf aren't there. So one of the things we talk about, and we try to work back with even our retail partners, is also thinking about what's the lifetime value, and thinking about how do we also offer something outside of just what's the physical good, the nutrition. And so we think of it in a couple different ways. One is, how can we bring content to the forefront to help either drive engagement or add incremental benefits to the pet parent because they're having challenges to make decisions. The other thing is we've started to unlock value through our loyalty program and thinking about the other levers that we have to either push or pull consumers to obviously drive some type of emotional gratification. And I think that's one of the things when we think of maybe the history piece here is, there's this humanization that is obviously needed. And one of the things, we're all in person here today and everyone was at CS or NRF. And there's just people that are, obviously jumping into activities and experiences. And so I think that's one thing that definitely pet parents and consumers are expecting is something outside of maybe what's inside the box or the package itself that the brand can call it, bring forward to help give them some type of instant gratification or maybe long-term gratification.
Excellent. I like that you guys have the different point of views, not quite a debate, I think you mentioned earlier. Perfect. Okay, so this is the last one looking backwards. So reflecting on 2022, what shifts have you seen in customer behavior, and then how have you adapted your marketing strategies accordingly?
Well, I can go first.
Okay.
All right, here's
All
the
right.
debate.
Well,
All right.
sure. So our last looking backwards question. So what I think is interesting, and 2022 kind of just ended. So we're not looking that far backwards in this case. We had this, I manage all of our e-com business, right? And we had this rocket ship of e-com growth. And I think the question, a lot of executives are asking, well, how high can this rocket ship go, and how does it keep going, and what's sort of my outlook for the future? And the challenge I think we saw in 2022 is you have these recessionary trends, so you're starting to have categories contract, you're having people return to store, and what makes it complicated is we were so used to showing huge growth numbers in e-commerce, and now we've had to sort of recenter around, well, what's the realistic outlook going forward? And also, what about digitally influenced sales? So what about driving in-store purchases? And it's hard because we've always looked at e-com as this sort of separate line item, and you can look at that way. But trying to understand that sort of digitally influenced sale and really getting at, what am I driving holistically from my investment, I think has been one of the major shifts for us, because no longer can we sort of really focus on, the up and to the right curve of e-commerce. We kind of have to think of that spend in kind of the broader spectrum of our marketing mix.
And so, I think on that front too, for us, has been also just the change of consumption within that period of time. Because as people were at home, they had a little bit more dedicated mind space to obviously buy different things and try to experiment, for instance, with their cat or dog, to give them incremental value of nutrition. And as people go back to work, or as people travel more, those shifts have actually been happening on top of just, some monetary pricing pressures. And so we've had to pivot in regards to thinking about what's the availability first of our goods, and then once the availability is there, how do we want to dial up our marketing, and what is the right type of messaging and content to help drive not just attraction, but then conversion. And so we've had to think about how to shift, the organization to kind of pivot based on some of these demand changes that we're seeing with our consumer. And that's definitely put pressure within the organization of just changing the plans, but also changing how we spend. And then on top of that, how we realize some of the results on the back end.
And you just segued into the next question psychically about conversion, but we also just talked there about differences in channels or digital driving the in-store experience. So how do you reduce friction and increase conversion through the customer journey? And then also, does it vary? I assume it varies by channel.
So you want me to take this one now?
Let's mix it up. You go.
Okay. You want? So one of the ways I think how we've been thinking through this is around navigation, as an example, on our branded site, but also taking some of those best practices and trying to share that back with some of our retail partners on how we've had to reset our navigation, for instance, on our website, so that maybe they can think about the pet parent differently based on that navigation. The second piece to this is we truly believe that first party, the idea of having fans that are raising their hands and leveraging that information to create consumer journeys is going to help us drive efficiency for sure, but obviously more effectiveness. So we'll actually be able to remove sometimes some of the layers of touch points on how we reach consumers and kind of connect them into really adding something to their cart, and then obviously making the conversion. So I think those are two things we've had to kind of do and think differently about.
Yeah, that testimonial aspect we heard in the Colgate-Palmolive dialogue a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Josh?
I think for us, I always go back to, whether it's, the kind of Google study of every millisecond longer a search takes or whatever it is, you're losing revenue. I always try to think about when we have somebody on a PDP, how do I get them the information they need to make a purchasing decision as fast as possible? So that's not only having written content, but having the right visual content. I think video is a huge opportunity. We're seeing it on more PDPs with retailers. We're seeing it emerge into ad formats. But also, you want to make sure something we see on the back end is we have a wide gummy vitamin portfolio. We also own Trojan. We have a wide assortment of condoms. And you want to make sure somebody's buying the thing that's right for them, because the worst thing you can do is force somebody into a conversion when ultimately they're going to give you a bad review. So I think we also try to focus, while we want to focus on conversion, that we're converting you on the right thing, because we have categories that, there's lots of categories that are confusing, and it may actually be harder to shop it online than at shelf. So something I'm, particularly focused on is always making sure we're queuing up, I think, the portfolio line in a certain way. So we don't want to distract people from the conversion, but we also want to make sure, this is kind of the main benefit here. And if you're looking for something else, we have these other options. So to me, I think for holistic brand conversion, getting that brand story kind of front and center and the differentiation around the line is a big thing for us, especially as we're trying to, bring in new customers to the brand.
I do like what Josh said, though, around video being added to, for instance, in the PDP, and talking about what's the difference between digital versus, call it, the physical shelf. And so thinking through the packaging and also the messaging that would become the hierarchy of how to connect the consumer and make them make decisions, I think shifts based on obviously where they're visiting, if it's a website or if it's a physical store, and what are those two things that are going to be levers to help make them convert. And I think, Josh was kind of tackling, I think, two areas where you've seen brands kind of amp up and take those insights and try to make different decisions based on their outcomes, for instance, even in packaging. So,
I think that's a really good point, because I think another lens you can look at it through is what's really hard to communicate on the package, right? That you can't get across on that shelf, because we do know even when people are shopping in stores, sometimes they're opening up, a lot of times, I don't know, their stats, 80, 90%, people are opening up their phone for sort of research. So what is it easier to explain, whether it's through video or imagery, that you want to make sure you get across to that person? Because again, I go back to that feedback loop of the reviews. God forbid you get somebody who buys a product who uses it incorrectly because they didn't understand it, or buys it and it's not for what it was intended to be used for.
Not to put you on the spot, but can you give a product-specific example of that?
You are definitely putting me on the spot. Man, I really don't want to go down the Trojan condoms example category on this one. Yeah, we're already there. I'm going to go there. We're going to go there. So, there are different expectations. Believe it or not, the number one attribute in condoms is thin that people are looking for. They're looking generally for the thinnest possible condom. But then there are other benefits. And some of condoms marketing is, you're marketing to young male consumers. You're trying to have a lot of sort of, I call it, more sexy kind of hip marketing. And you don't always, I struggle a lot with, candidly, the brand team. You don't always explain the product that well at the end of the day. So I think that's one where being super clear about who this condom is for versus this condom is for is key, because we will see bad reviews when people have different expectations there for what they're getting. So I think that's one where, candidly, anecdotally, I've heard from retailers, people spend 5 or 6 minutes on a condom PDP. Because you picture this young consumer who normally was terrified in the aisle, trying to research this stuff. PDP is a pretty safe place for them to kind of peruse there. So, so that's the one that immediately came to mind. So,
for us, it would be ingredients. When we change ingredients, as an example, for instance, chicken's a good example. And if we would remove it or add it, a fourth of our dogs are normally allergic to chicken. And so that has a dramatic change. And so when we think of omni-commerce, right, people immediately go, oh, what's the ingredients? And then they maybe start with the physical package and then drive it out. But knowing how many touch points you have and making sure you can relay that information correctly, especially each retailer has a different cadence on how they update their content too. You just got to think about where it starts and how it ends for the consumer. And that can be a dramatic change for us, where we can get, really hit in the face if we don't do it appropriately.
I know.
Yeah,
No,
it's about a fourth of dogs, have some type of chicken allergy. You might not know it, but I can speak even when we had our dog, we didn't know it, and the vet didn't prescribe it. We went to a pet boutique. It's she probably has chicken allergy. Go test this. And that's how we got the Blue. Test this food out, and then sure enough, it removed the allergy.
Is there a Blue Buffalo product you'd recommend for those chicken allergic folks?
Non-chicken. Sorry, I'm trying to keep it simple at the PDP.
Beef, vegetable. Yeah, that's interesting. Very good. I heard Amy in the panel before talk about incrementality. These guys know I'm not a marketer. You guys probably know from my questions I'm not a marketer.
She's a marketer.
I work in payments, but I'm learning all kinds of new words. So I heard Amy talk about incrementality. So you guys talked about how a big question with omnichannel marketing efforts are incrementality versus channel shift. So how are you addressing that?
It's a really good question. Yeah. So incrementality. I think the quote I kind of use, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's not that incremental. But if you're not kind of attacking omnichannel, it can be very detrimental to your brand. In that, these are the same shoppers that are buying things in store that are migrating online, and it's a phenomenal opportunity for any brand that, as that behavior shift occurs, there's a chance for disruption. There's a chance for you to take market share. So it may not be adding that much to the total pie. I mean, obviously there's convenience, kind of ease of getting the product, things like that. There's things like subscriptions and whatnot. But really, I think it's about getting in there with that share. And the one thing we do know, at least with online shopping, because of buy it again, because of subscriptions, there's substantially more kind of potential incremental value and loyalty in sort of getting people online buying a product versus in store, where every time they walk in, they have an opportunity to switch, and it's very easy versus when it becomes buy it again on their order, or they already have a subscription going. So I think that's a key thing that we kind of focus on in that space.
I just want to echo what Josh said around subscription. I mean, subscription's a pretty simple business model if you can do it right. And so for us, and some of you who are maybe parents or pet parents, you like the convenience, and you don't want to overthink it because we are so stressed out about everything else going in our lives. And so if it's like a Sunday shopping routine that normally you do to get your basket filled, you're just clicking and going. And I think also during the pandemic, as an example with subscriptions were normally prioritized based on the retailers first to help sustain momentum with that consumer. And so if you raised your hand early on, you've probably just stayed to that method of, well, it's just convenient and it's easy. And so for us in the pet space, it's about a third to a quarter of our volume in e-com roughly comes from this space. And it naturally makes sense because we have 60-pound sometimes dog bags. You don't want to lug that through a store or lug that to your car and then up the stairs. And so it's a little bit more of the convenience added to it. The other aspect is, I think, the way algorithms and the experiences digitally have been designed, there's been a huge shift too, I think, based on age and demographics. And so younger consumers are kind of gravitating to this, well, they understand me, they know me, and they just kind of make my recommendations and fill in my cart, versus maybe an older consumer might want to still do the exploration, and because that's a little bit more of the routine. And so there was actually a white paper done by Accenture recently that kind of talked about these shifts that they're seeing coming off COVID, where they've seen dramatic changes based on consumer behavior, based on the physical and the digital space, and who's, call it, raising their hand and making some of these different shifts. So it's pretty unique.
And what about just kind of a follow-up question to that I was just thinking about as you answered. So incrementality in subscription, the subscription services that I have, you sort of employ them and then let them go, and I don't necessarily change them for months or years on end. So how do you address added spend or changes there?
That is, I think, one of the things we're trying to tackle, because the way, when you'd walk into a store, it was easy to, pick up incremental items. Mm-hmm. And these days, when it's a one-stop shop and it's so seamless, I don't think we don't have the right answer yet. What we're trying to do to challenge maybe the headwinds we think we might see is try to experiment. And so we're just trying to run different types of experiments to see if one of those experiments could maybe drive to some type of scale that might change our business model. So, for us, it's more of that idea of testing and learning and using this mentality of experimentation to see if we can get a couple things to stick on the wall and then see if they can become bigger from a macro standpoint. Yeah.
And that's probably not as relevant to your world, or?
I think it's a challenge. I mean, I think we're just happy with the loyalty, the brand loyalty of the subscription, but in terms of sort of trading up or doing additional things, I mean, it is tricky. And certainly, let's say you make a change to a product or you discontinue a product, we do have to think about kind of moving consumers. I still think one of our challenges, and I'm sure your challenges too, is, the retailer at the end of the day owns that relationship, but you do have an ability to retarget those consumers, try to understand those consumers, and perhaps, educate them about new offerings. Especially in the case, I think we've had some good fortune as we've made strategic choices with our litter business to move consumers to products that we view as more kind of business sustainable who are existing Subscribe and Save shoppers. So I think there still is that ability to know that this is a high affinity, valuable consumer that you can potentially reach with new offerings.
And Josh, on that note too, is that idea of trialing, right? Like trialing products. So I think that's like one area where brands can try to experiment a little bit differently to see if they could start to get someone to call it reach another $5 or $10, depending on what you're selling. But start with the trial application to see if they would raise their hand again, and then now make it a consumption routine to their buying habits.
So another omni-channel question, but I was just thinking to myself, so when I talk to retailers, I try to talk their language. What do you think about the term omni-channel? Do you like it?
It's a really tough term. We were kind of talking about this before. Some people say omnichannel and they really mean e-com. Some people say omnichannel and it's actually meant to be all channels. So I think it gets misused in lots of different ways in terms of how people want to define it and things. So I don't think there's anything bad with the word itself. I just think it's a sort of consistent definition. And to me, and how we should be using omnichannel is really about any fulfillment method the consumer wants. But I've seen it used sometimes as like, oh, well, we've got to grow the omni-channel business, which means the online business of a brick and mortar retailer. So, it's definitely a challenge. I think the term is okay, but trying to focus on what are all the different fulfillment methods and all the different ways consumers want to receive products. And I think we want to move with consumer trends, but I'm not trying to force somebody in a certain direction. I think we only want to rock the boat so much and just try to follow what is naturally the consumer behavior thing rather than really try to say like, oh, you should really be picking this up in store. I think the retailers think a little bit more in that lens. But as a brand, it's really we want to have the right offering for whatever way the consumer wants to receive it.
Yeah, internally, Blue Buffalo is owned by General Mills. We use the term connected commerce kind of. I think the idea of, commerce is almost common language. We heard about phone, right? Obviously accelerate that. Now if TVs do, I think everything's connected and it turns into an engagement and a commerce experience. And so that's where we've kind of coined the term connected commerce to kind of drive those outcomes. So it's commerce to me in general, but I think connected is what we use.
Yeah, good. What would you say is the most difficult thing about crafting an omni-channel strategy?
I guess I would say one of the challenges is a lot of different potential owners of that strategy, a lot of stakeholders there. So when we talk omnichannel, if we're not using it as e-com, then you have the sales team involved, you have the marketing team involved, you have the shopper marketing team involved. So everybody would like credit for it. No one would like to pay for it. So it's a little bit challenging to figure out, candidly, the accounting of that and what is the right feedback loop. If we need to make decisions there, who owns that decision, who influences that decision. So, I can speak to, we are definitely going through some, I think, growing pains on that sort of decision ownership journey there because you have so many different folks who have a vested interest in it. So to me, I think that feedback loop and that ways of working is probably the biggest challenge right now. I think all the data and things are there. It's just kind of giving people the appropriate kind of role on the team.
And we talked some before too about the measurability aspects of that. So
yes.
the funds come from here, and how do you measure the spend here versus here? Anything to add there?
Well, I was just going to echo a little bit what Josh said. I think one is I don't think it's across just your organization. I think it's across multiple organizations. Is you do have more cooks in the kitchen. So who has the decision rights and who has the funding and really the outcome rights? I think the end of the day is if we think about the end state, which is the consumer, you're going to win. And so I think that's the mindset you have to take to it in regards to trying to build, hopefully, longevity of this business plan around that. And I think the brands that are able to do it are the ones that are winning right now today because they're not fighting internally, they're fighting externally with their consumer and their right partners to win with that consumer.
I think that's a really key thing, which is the group feeling like these are the right strategic things to do and not getting caught up in, people will get caught up in the accounting and everything, but I think that journey, to your point of, you can just hold hands and say, this is what we want to do, I get it. That's really key. And sort of, to your point about leaning in, experimenting, like some of this is new, especially for some of those stakeholders in this, of kind of understanding the implications of, going down different paths.
One of you said too, I don't care where they buy, I care that they buy. And I don't know if I'll get you in trouble.
I think it was
for
both of
saying
us
that.
actually said
Okay.
that. I mean,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think most brands don't really care. I mean, they want to know where you bought it and why. But I think the end of the day is you don't care where you bought it, because if you think of it being a seamless omni world, it doesn't matter. You want to be there where the consumer is and give them whatever they want at that point in time, as best as you can. And I know that's easy to say. It's really tough sometimes to execute, but I think most brands would feel that way.
Okay, so looking ahead, what trends do you see that you're focused on for 2023?
Well, I think we're probably going to see about 20% of our sales come from the metaverse this year, so we're pretty pumped about that. I'm joking. Yeah, right. No, metaverse, it'll happen one of these days. But no, I mean, really looking ahead, and it's interesting because prior to sort of the recessionary trends, there was a lot more metaverse talk, and now I think we're a little bit back to basics. I really think it is getting to that omni-channel marketing activation, and really, I think there's a couple things for me. One, understanding, how are we driving and investing in customers holistically and feeling good about that. Another big thing in CPG is I've seen this shift from, we had marketing mix models where you find out how your marketing did a year from now, to ROAS, where you find out about it really fast, but it's a really flawed metric. But if you want to get somebody off your back, you just say, oh, I got a $7 ROAS, it's fine. To now I'm seeing new to brand enter the conversation, share of voice enter the conversation. I think getting to that true, it might be a balanced scorecard of different metrics of trying to get into incrementality, because I think each metric has its own flaws. New to brand, we usually have at the retailer level, which doesn't tell you about channel shifting and things like that. So I think kind of honing in on that metric or metrics that you feel good about, incrementality, because I'm amazed at how many partners will come to me and ask about a ROAS floor, or what's like the lowest ROAS you can accept. And realistically, I know there's optically like 10 cents or something like that, but if you feel good about the strategy and potentially the, we talked about long-term value earlier today. If you feel good about what this spend is driving, you shouldn't be scared of a 30, 50 cent ROAS, whatever it is, if it feels strategically sound for the long term. And so I think that's going to be, especially with pretty, chaotic kind of financial times we're in, I think that's going to be a real challenge looking ahead for a lot of organizations to kind of make that leap and be okay planning with that long view.
You said a lot there. I think there's a couple of things top of mind for me. One is this idea of pushing on experimentation, and part of this is, in the pandemic, people were willing to take risks to survive. And I think in a recession, you have to still be willing to take risks. You probably can't take as many, but you still got to take some risks. And they have to be experiments, right? So that you're learning, so that you're moving the ball forward versus kind of staying maybe in your lane. So I think that's one thing that, I'm constantly trying to push and trying to help support where needed. And then I think the second thing is around the measurement. Yeah, I think everyone has a different measurement, and getting people aligned on that measurement. And so for me, my measurement is the lifetime value and how we see lifetime value growing or flattening out or maybe slowing, because I think that really shows the health of the brand, but also like the decisions and the outcomes we're taking to help drive value for not just our brand, but also our shareholders, to show that, hey, we're in this game to really win it and keep on growing as a business and a brand. So that's, to me, like one of the things. And I keep on maybe sometimes preaching, talking about actions and outcomes, because I can really measure those and see those real time. And to me, those are leading indicators versus maybe sometimes the lagging. I do think you need some of the lagging, though, too, just because of historically maybe how we've measured things. So you got to figure out whatever that art and science is in those measurement cycles.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think, as we get this pressure, I think we've maybe swung the pendulum a little bit too much towards performance marketing. and whether it's experimentation and trying new things, or whether it's just good old like equity building, right? Like how do we continue to build our brands? I think we're going to start to see that kind of moderate. It's kind of that middle ground between the marketing mix and the ROAS piece, and how do we just like get comfortable with continuing to take risks, but also be comfortable that we cannot explain what every spend did immediately.
I love to, so you both just touched on experimentation, and I like that word, like we talked earlier about failing, trying things, failing, learning. It's just an adventurous spin on that. I just got the 5-minute signal, so I'm going to steal a question somebody asked earlier that we didn't prepare for. No, it's an easy one. So, and I'm a little nervous because of some of the products that you just described under your brand, but what is your favorite, or what is your dog's favorite product that your company offers?
When we don't have our dog anymore, but
I'm sorry.
We
can talk about that later.
It's been a few years. I think I like to look at ratings and reviews and see what consumers are saying, and so I think some of the things have been we had like holiday treats as an example, and so it's a nice way to drive some type of personalization and kind of like a theme. And it's joyful to call it the outcomes that pet parents are putting on there. So that for me brings a lot of joy. And then on top of that, normally then they'll talk about our experiences. And so when the experiences and the food are 5 stars, it's a win. So, yeah.
All right. I've been noodling on my answer. So, one of the things I like about our product portfolio is it's so different. I started my career at Campbell's, and no offense to Campbell's, but at a certain point when you've worked on soup for so long, you're kind of tired of the category. So I like being able to go from a cat litter meeting to a gummy vitamins meeting, et cetera. So that's always, to me, that's I think the funnest thing about the brands I work on. In terms of personally, one thing about going from a food company to, we'll call it a non-food company, is the level of snacks is pretty limited. So I consider myself our resident adverse event tester for gummy vitamins. So that's probably my favorite brand, and I'm always excited when we have new things for me to try. And again, try not to overindulge, but it happens amidst limited other snack options. So
I need to check too the gummy vitamins that we buy if they're a Church and Dwight brand, and if not, you can swing me. So all right, very good. I just lost Mike. Do we have time for a question or two? Yes. Okay, very good.
I don't know about anyone else, but I couldn't help it in my head here. No soup for you as soon as you say that makes sense. And I suppose out of all your products, if you're going to overindulge with one, the gummies are probably the safest. All right. Any questions from the audience? Yes. I'll bring it back to you.
I have a pretty loud voice.
Oh, game on. Now we're talking. Name and where you're from, and keep that projection.
Hi, I'm Stephanie from Castify. I have 2 questions, actually. One is the chicken thing for cats, too? My cat's got an allergy. I'm trying to figure out. Or is that just dogs?
I'm not a vet, so let me just put that out there.
You're the closest.
Yeah, I would, to be honest, I would just look. It wouldn't blow my mind. I mean, we all have allergies too, so I just think it's the new way of the world, but yeah. I can't talk as in depth yet, but we're working on that exact use case right now today. But yeah, we are looking to, we have a hypothesis, right, based on insights, X amount of pet parents will be in the market, but now we're trying to get to a spot where, okay, who is she, Stephanie? What does she do on a Friday night? And trying to be more precise so that it's efficient and effective. So we're in the midst of that. And so we're gonna kick off work depending on how everything shakes out, probably like in May this year, to start to go do some of that work and get a little bit more prescriptive. But yeah, we do take consumer insights in of how many pet parents there are and how many are gonna raise their hand and adopt. What we are seeing, call it coming off the pandemic, is there's been probably like less adoptions. There's been more of just growing the family. So maybe you were a pet parent, now you have a dog. So that's what we're starting to see is this incrementality within the same household. So I think that's been one of the bigger shifts off the pandemic here for pet parents.
I'll just add, I mean, we are not as scientific probably as your approach, but generally people are, we own a cat litter, Arm & Hammer, Clump & Seal cat litter. So generally people are pretty risk averse about switching their cat litter. So our signal is kind of if you're just searching the word cat litter, like odds are you're in the market because, you know, to your point about subscriptions, for the most part, people are kind of, you know, not looking to switch. So that's been kind of a barometer for us. But I do want to mention that we talked about channel incrementality earlier. It is a big thing with cat litter at the end of the day because, you know, odds are you are just taking somebody from another channel because there's only so many. We're not creating new cats by, you know, selling litter online. So that's something we are trying to think about is like, you know, the actual incrementality piece that ties to that because we know, you know, if anything, they're shifting channels more likely than being a new cat owner.
Future product, maybe.
Awesome. I will say, coming from Minnesota, you see once the winter hits, though, the cat litter shelves are empty, and it has nothing to do with cats. It's because we put it in our cars. Some of you are like, what would that mean? We put it in our cars because you can put it under your tires if you get stuck in the snow, and it helps. So.
I haven't quantified that yet, so.
Hey, Lance Porgo from the Shipyard. So you guys are, you know, consistently saying we don't really care whether they buy in store or buy online, but this is also a time where you're trying to acquire first-party data. I mean, so what's the discussion? Do you not want to lead people towards that as a viable option or a better option? I mean, for, you know, you had mentioned, you know, condoms, people sitting, you know, 5 minutes on the PDP and, you know, and having a better online experience where you can get more of the ingredients. It feels like everyone wants to say that it's the same, but as you guys in digital, is there not a push towards trying to get some D2C?
No, well, how we look at first party is we just want to know the consumer first, right? So we can drive personalized outcomes from there. How those personalized outcomes show up, 9 times out of 10 probably won't be maybe through like a direct commerce relationship. It probably will be through a retailer, but the goal here is that we are giving them the right information at the right time at the right place. And so that's how we're looking at it. If they do happen to, you know, buy something through us, that's great. But, you know, for us, it's more of like, how do we move the brand forward and connect the dots for the consumer?
I will say I didn't exactly speak earlier, but technically I own e-com market share, so I actually do care that they buy it online. But thinking holistically as a company citizen, no. For us, it's the way of, you know, the reality is somewhere in the value chain, direct to consumer, whatever it is, unless you're in a more like luxury space, I get it. For CPG, there's a profit hit from selling online. So for me, it's the kind of debate between profitability, and where you'd probably rather them shop in the store, and that lifetime value kind of loyalty where I know I can have somebody a little bit more, whether it's through subscriptions or just buy it again. I know that I can have data on somebody or have them a little bit more locked in. So it is sort of a trade-off there, and I think we think pretty differently about different categories depending on the economics there.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Let's give him a warm round of applause.